There comes a moment in your life when the noise quiets, the chaos rearranges itself, and something within you rises with a clarity you haven't known before. This is not luck, nor coincidence. It is the beginning of your golden age, a season where your inner strength aligns with your outer life, where you transcend old patterns and where the world begins to reflect the depth you've been building in silence. Your golden age is not about wealth, age, or status. It is about awakening, a shift inside you so profound that everything around you must recalibrate. You begin to outgrow what once confined you. You stop shrinking to fit into small places. You start becoming the person your younger self needed and the person your future self will thank you for. You start walking differently, not faster, not louder, but with a grounded steadiness born from self-respect. Your priorities evolve. Peace becomes more important than approval. Depth becomes more valuable than attention. Alignment matters more than attachment. You find yourself celebrating solitude the same way others celebrate crowds, not because you're withdrawing, but because you finally understand how to hear yourself. As you enter your golden age, you release what drains you. You detach from what disguises itself as love but acts like weight. You stop feeling guilty for choosing yourself. Your inner world expands. Your emotional vision sharpens, and you discover that the life you once chased begins to move toward you instead. You begin to attract differently, people who resonate with your truth, opportunities that mirror your growth, paths that honor your worth. You no longer fear endings because you finally see them for what they are, doorways. You no longer resist change because you understand it is the language of transformation. The golden age is not a destination. It is a state of being, a recognition that you no longer live life reactively, you live it consciously. You no longer abandon yourself, you return to yourself. And in that return, life unveils its richness, its meaning, and its possibilities. You are not becoming someone new. You are becoming who you were meant to be all along. You outgrow old patterns effortlessly because something inside you finally refuses to return to what once numbed you, distracted you, or limited you. It's not that the old habits stop appearing. It's that they stop appealing. What once felt familiar now feels too small, too heavy, too misaligned with the person you are becoming. You wake up one day and realize that the situations you used to tolerate now feel like a violation of your own energy. You begin to sense the difference between comfort and growth, between routine and stagnation, and that awareness alone becomes the force that moves you forward. You no longer find yourself pulled toward the same emotional loops, because you've learned the lessons they were meant to teach you. You stop arguing about things that don't matter. You stop fighting battles that drain you. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. There is a serenity in this transformation, a quiet but powerful shift that comes not from resistance but from evolution. Outgrowing old patterns is not about discipline or willpower. It's about developing a relationship with yourself that is rooted in honesty. When you see yourself clearly, you can no longer hide behind excuses. You can no longer cling to habits that sabotage you. You start recognizing the emotional triggers that once controlled your decisions, and instead of falling into them, you observe them. Instead of reacting impulsively, you pause. Instead of chasing validation, you choose self-respect. That pause alone becomes a revolution. It creates space to think, space to feel, space to choose differently. In that space, the old version of you begins to dissolve because it no longer has your participation. You outgrow patterns effortlessly when you stop needing them for identity. You no longer need chaos to feel alive. You no longer need attachment to feel secure. You no longer need approval to feel worthy. As your inner world strengthens, the outer patterns that once defined you start losing their grip. You become more loyal to your peace than to your past. And in that loyalty, change becomes natural rather than forced. You begin aligning with environments, relationships, and habits that honor the person you are becoming, not the person you once were. You start realizing that growth isn't something you chase, it is something you allow. And when you finally allow it, you rise above old patterns, the same way a flame rises above the match that created it, naturally, effortlessly, And inevitably, peace becomes more valuable than approval when you finally understand the cost of constantly trying to be accepted. At some point you recognize how much of yourself you've handed away just to make others comfortable, how many times you silenced your intuition, ignored your boundaries, or shaped your personality into something more convenient for someone else. There comes a moment when the exhaustion of pretending outweighs the fear of being misunderstood, and that moment becomes the shift. You realize that approval is unstable, conditional, and often dependent on expectations you never agreed to live by. But peace is internal. It doesn't demand performance. It doesn't punish authenticity. It simply asks you to honor what you already know is true. And once you taste that kind of inner steadiness, you stop trading it for the temporary comfort of being liked. When peace becomes your priority, your decisions change. You start saying no without guilt. You begin stepping back from people who drain you rather than trying to win them over. You stop feeling obligated to explain your choices or justify your boundaries. You recognize that anyone who demands you sacrifice your emotional well-being for their approval is not offering real connection. Instead of chasing validation, you cultivate self-respect. Instead of bending to keep the peace externally, you begin protecting your peace internally. It's not about isolation or superiority, it's about realizing that your energy is finite and your spirit is not designed to be shaped endlessly to please others. Choosing peace over approval also shifts how you show up in relationships. You start valuing sincerity over popularity, meaning over numbers, depth over attention. You no longer feel compelled to please everyone because you know not everyone is meant to understand you. You start letting people reveal who they truly are instead of trying to convince them to see your worth. You stop negotiating your identity just to fit in. You stop apologizing for your truth. And with each decision that honors your inner calm, your life begins to reflect a higher standard, one that aligns with who you are rather than who others expect you to be. Eventually you realize that the peace you are protecting is not fragile, it is the foundation of your growth. It becomes the compass that guides your choices, the filter that shapes your connections, and the quiet strength that replaces the need to be approved. In choosing peace, you choose yourself, and that choice changes everything. There comes a moment when you realize that the constant pursuit of being liked, understood, or validated has only exhausted you. People's opinions, once heavy enough to shape your decisions, begin to lose their influence. You start to notice how often you abandoned your own needs just to make others comfortable, how many times you silenced your truth to avoid disappointing someone, how often you carried the invisible weight of being acceptable. But inner peace has a different language, quiet, steady, honest. And slowly you begin choosing that voice over the noise around you. The approval you once chased starts to feel shallow compared to the serenity you feel when you honor yourself. You begin to understand that peace is not passive, it's powerful. It requires boundaries, it requires honesty, and sometimes it requires letting go of people who are offended by your authenticity. You stop negotiating with your own intuition just to keep the peace externally. You stop shrinking or apologizing for who you are. Instead of asking, will they like this? You begin asking, does this feel right? Approval is unpredictable, offered today, withdrawn tomorrow, dependent on moods, expectations, and projections that have nothing to do with who you truly are. Peace, however, is constant once you commit to it. It becomes your internal compass, something no one else can give or take away. As peace becomes your priority, your reactions change. You no longer feel compelled to defend yourself in every conversation or win every argument. You stop explaining your heart to people who have no real interest in understanding it. You learn that silence is not weakness, it is strength chosen. You learn that walking away from drama is not avoidance, it is self-respect practiced. You begin to see how approval demands performance, while peace demands presence, and presence is where your power lives. You start to value environments where your nervous system relaxes, rather than environments where your worth is constantly measured. You choose relationships that feel calm over those that feel exciting but unstable. You choose routines that nourish you instead of ones that drain you. In these choices, you reclaim your time, your emotional energy, and your identity. Gradually, the idea of living for others becomes unbearable, and the idea of living in alignment with your truth becomes non-negotiable. And without force or effort, peace becomes the new standard by which you measure everything in your life. There is a profound shift that happens when solitude stops feeling like an emptiness you must escape and begins to feel like a sanctuary you willingly return to. In the past, you may have filled your silence with noise, your time with distractions, your loneliness with people who had no real place in your life. But as you grow, solitude takes on a new meaning. It becomes the space where you meet yourself without interruption, without expectation, without performance. You begin to appreciate the quiet moments, where you can finally hear your own thoughts without them being tangled with opinions, demands, or judgments from others. In solitude, your self-awareness sharpens. You learn what truly excites you, what drains you, what inspires you, and what wounds you. You start recognizing your emotional patterns not from a place of criticism, but from a place of compassion. You realize that your inner voice, once overshadowed by the noise of the world, has wisdom that you had been ignoring. Solitude becomes the mirror that shows you your strength, your softness, and your resilience, unfiltered and unmasked. It teaches you that companionship is meaningful, but self-connection is essential. As you embrace time alone, you stop fearing your own company. You no longer seek relationships to fill a void. You seek them to enrich a life that is already whole. You no longer tolerate chaos just to avoid feeling alone. You choose stillness because it brings clarity. You become selective with who you let into your space, because you understand that your peace is sacred. You begin to attract people who respect your boundaries, because you finally respect them yourself. Solitude also shows you that stillness is not stagnation. It is refinement. It is in these quiet spaces that your creativity awakens, your intuition deepens, and your emotional strength amplifies. You discover the difference between isolation, which shrinks the soul, and solitude, which expands it. You learn that stepping back from the world at times is not withdrawal, it is preparation. And as you spend more time alone, you begin to navigate your life with a grounded clarity that cannot be shaken by external noise. Slowly, solitude shifts from something you endure to something you cherish. It becomes the foundation from which you build your future, the environment where you return to restore yourself, and the proof that your strength has always lived within you, even in the quietest moments. You release what drains or diminishes you when you finally understand that your energy is not infinite and your spirit is not designed to carry what was never meant for you. This release does not happen out of anger or bitterness, it happens out of clarity. You begin to see how certain people, habits, and environments pull you away from yourself. You notice how your body tightens around certain conversations, how your mind feels heavy after certain interactions, how your heart dims in spaces where you are unseen or unvalued, and instead of forcing yourself to stay, instead of convincing yourself to endure, you start honoring the signals your inner world has been sending you all along. You begin releasing not because you no longer care, but because you care too much about your own well-being to stay where you are shrinking. Letting go of what drains you becomes an act of self-respect. You stop trying to fix what has no desire to change. You stop romanticizing potential and ignoring patterns. You stop excusing behavior that consistently wounds you. You start understanding that anything requiring you to betray yourself is already too expensive. The moment you choose yourself, the things that once held power over you lose their influence. Situations that once consumed your thoughts suddenly feel irrelevant. People who once triggered your insecurities no longer have access to your emotional world. You detach without resentment because your heart has outgrown the need to be understood by everyone. You learn that preserving your peace is not selfish, it is essential. Releasing what diminishes you opens space for what strengthens you. You start gravitating toward what nourishes your spirit, what deepens your self-trust, what aligns with your truth. You become more selective, not out of arrogance but out of wisdom. You start holding your energy the way you should have all along, with intention. You realize that not everything deserves a response, not everyone deserves a seat at your table, and not every connection deserves lifelong access. You become comfortable with endings because they no longer symbolize loss, they symbolize liberation. With each release, you reclaim another piece of yourself. You reclaim your time, your confidence, your boundaries, your voice. And as the unnecessary falls away, something extraordinary happens. You feel lighter, clearer, and more connected to who you truly are. You begin to rise, not dramatically but steadily. And in that rise, you rediscover the power of choosing yourself. You attract opportunities that match your growth because you finally rise into an inner frequency that reflects who you truly are, not who you were trained to be. When you shift internally, the world around you shifts in response. Your choices become clearer, your boundaries become stronger, and your energy becomes more intentional. This creates a silent but undeniable signal that draws in experiences aligned with your evolution. You stop chasing situations that were built on your old insecurities, and as a result you naturally begin to meet opportunities that resonate with your new level of clarity. Life starts opening doors you once didn't even know existed, not because it suddenly favors you, but because you have become someone who can finally recognize and receive them. Opportunities begin to feel less like accidents and more like reflections of your inner work. The more you heal, the more you attract relationships rooted in respect and emotional maturity. The more you understand your worth, the more you find yourself surrounded by environments that affirm it. Growth changes what you tolerate, and in doing so, it changes the options available to you. The tasks you once accepted out of fear are replaced by roles you choose out of confidence. The people you once held onto out of loneliness are replaced by individuals who meet you with honesty and mutual value. Your world becomes a mirror, and the clarity within you reshapes the reflections around you. As you grow, you begin stepping into alignment rather than desperation. You no longer operate from a mindset of lack, so you stop accepting opportunities that drain you or diminish your capabilities. Instead, you start gravitating toward paths that challenge you in meaningful ways, experiences that stretch your potential, and connections that inspire you to continue evolving. Even opportunities that appear difficult or unexpected are understood differently. They feel purposeful, guiding you toward higher versions of yourself rather than trapping you in cycles you've outgrown. This shift is not magic, it is the natural consequence of self-respect. When you stop chasing what isn't meant for you, what is meant for you can finally arrive. And because you've grown, you now recognize that genuine opportunities don't require you to shrink, beg, or compromise your values. They meet you where you stand, stronger, wiser, and rooted in who you truly are. Gradually, your life transforms into a space that reflects your growth, your truth, and your readiness for everything you once thought was out of reach. There comes a point when you realize that peace isn't just a feeling, it's a form of wisdom. It's the quiet realization that you no longer need to bend, shrink, or distort yourself to earn a place in someone else's world. The approval you once chased no longer feels like nourishment, it feels like noise. You begin to see how often you traded your own calm for temporary validation, how often you silenced your truth just to avoid disappointing someone, how often you accepted discomfort because you feared being misunderstood. But as you grow, you reach a moment where the cost of those compromises becomes too high. You feel the weight of them in your body, in your breath, in your spirit. And so, without fanfare or announcement, you begin choosing differently. Peace becomes more valuable than approval when you learn that saying yes to everything is actually a form of self-abandonment. You start recognizing that every time you betray your instincts to please someone else, you drift further from yourself. The desire to be accepted loses its grip when you realize how expensive it is to live a life that isn't yours. Approval begins to feel hollow when it requires you to sacrifice your authenticity. The applause loses its meaning when you know it's not meant for the real you, but for the version you performed. You begin to speak less but mean more. You start drawing boundaries not to shut people out, but to protect the inner space you fought so hard to create. You learn that peace isn't passive. It's a daily act of choosing what supports your emotional clarity. It's a discipline, it's a decision, it's a refusal to argue about things that don't touch your soul. It's the quiet courage to walk away from people who manipulate your kindness or weaponize your empathy. It's the strength to sit with discomfort rather than run to the nearest distraction. As peace rises in value, your entire relationship with the world shifts. You no longer rush to fix, to prove, or to be chosen. You no longer beg for a seat at tables where your spirit feels tense. You choose environments that feel like oxygen, not pressure. And in this shift you discover that the life you once tried to gain approval for was far smaller than the one that awaits you when solitude becomes a sanctuary the moment you realize it isn't emptiness, it's clarity. It is the place where the world's expectations fade, and you finally hear the sound of your own mind without interruption. You stop fearing being alone because you discover that loneliness doesn't come from the absence of people, it comes from the absence of connection with yourself. When you begin to build that connection, solitude transforms from something you endure into something you value. You no longer seek constant noise or company to distract you from your feelings. You learn to sit with them, understand them, and let them guide you. As you embrace solitude, you discover that being alone doesn't diminish you, it restores you. You learn how much energy you used to lose by over-explaining, over-giving, or overthinking in the presence of others who never truly saw you. Solitude becomes the moment you drop the roles you've been performing. You stop being who the world expects and begin being who you really are. In that authenticity you find strength, quiet, steady, unshakable strength. A strength that doesn't need validation or applause. A strength that grows in the soil of self-respect. You start understanding your patterns, your desires, your wounds, and your potential with greater clarity. You begin to see what genuinely inspires you and what only distracts you. You become more intentional with your time, more selective with your energy, and more protective of your emotional world. Solitude sharpens your intuition. It strengthens your boundaries. It deepens your understanding of what you will and will not accept. In solitude, you learn that your own company is not a second option. It is a home, a place where you can rebuild, realign, and rise without interference. And as your comfort with solitude strengthens, your tolerance for superficial connections weakens. You no longer cling to relationships that drain you because you know you can stand on your own. You no longer fear walking away because you have learned how to walk alone with grace. Slowly, solitude becomes power. It becomes the space where you create, heal, reflect, and reinvent. And the more you grow in that sacred space, the more confidently you step into the world, not dependent on others for your strength, but carrying your strength within you. Releasing what drains you is often the quietest yet most transformative decision you ever make. You begin to sense the subtle ways certain situations, relationships, and habits pull you away from yourself. There is a heaviness in the energy, a tension in your spirit, a sense of being pulled downward rather than lifted. For a long time you may have tolerated it because you hoped things would change, or because you told yourself that loyalty required endurance. But growth teaches you that true loyalty begins with the loyalty you owe yourself. You can no longer ignore the fatigue that comes from giving to what does not replenish you. You release what drains you not out of anger, but out of clarity. You begin to understand that your energy is not infinite, and that not everyone deserves access to it. You start recognizing patterns of emotional exhaustion. Those conversations that leave you empty, the connections that require you to shrink, the environments that dim your voice. When you release these weights, you are not being cruel, you are choosing your life. You are choosing your sanity. You are choosing your alignment. The process is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the choice not to respond, not to engage, not to return to what keeps breaking you. Sometimes it is a boundary. Sometimes it is silence. But each step you take toward releasing what drains you is a step back toward yourself. You begin cutting ties with guilt, Because guilt is often the chain that keeps people attached to their own suffering. You realize that you cannot save someone at the cost of losing yourself. You cannot pour into places that have no capacity to hold you. As you release what diminishes you, you create room for what nourishes you. You make space for people who respect your boundaries, for opportunities that elevate you, for habits that sustain your growth. You begin to feel lighter, clearer, more aligned with your purpose. The world around you shifts because the world within you is shifting. What once felt necessary now feels optional. What once felt acceptable now feels intolerable. And what once drained you no longer has a place in the life you are consciously creating. When you grow internally, life begins to reflect that growth externally. You start attracting opportunities that align with who you are becoming rather than who you used to be. Opportunities are not just random events. They are mirrors of your energy, your mindset, and your readiness. When you elevate your standards, heal your wounds, and strengthen your sense of self, the world responds by offering paths that resonate with that evolution. You stop chasing what is misaligned because it no longer feels satisfying. Instead, you find yourself naturally drawn to environments, people, and experiences that support your expansion. Opportunities that once felt out of reach begin to appear because you now have the emotional capacity, self-belief, and clarity to receive them. Growth sharpens your perception. You see what you once overlooked, you understand what you once ignored, and you pursue what you once doubted you deserved. You become more intentional with your choices. You are no longer impulsive or desperate. You engage from a place of empowerment, not scarcity. You start recognizing that timing is not accidental, it aligns with your inner readiness. As you grow, your energy shifts, and that shift influences what gravitates toward you. People sense your confidence, your authenticity, your direction. Opportunities come not because you are lucky, but because you are aligned. You speak differently, move differently, decide differently. You stop settling, and life responds by offering more. You stop clinging, and life responds by giving space. You stop doubting, and life responds with clarity. Growth creates a vibration that attracts circumstances that honor your self-worth. You also begin to walk away from opportunities that no longer match your evolution. You trust your intuition when something feels too small or too draining. You understand that saying no is just as powerful as saying yes. You realize that growth is not just about receiving more, it's about receiving what aligns, and in that alignment, the quality of your life begins to rise. You find yourself in rooms you once feared, having conversations you once avoided, taking paths you once thought belonged to others. This is the natural result of becoming someone who honors their own expansion. Living consciously begins the moment you stop allowing life to push you into automatic responses. You start recognizing how often your reactions were shaped by old wounds, outdated beliefs, and conditioned fears. You see how many decisions you made just to avoid discomfort rather than to create fulfillment. But growth brings awareness, and awareness brings choice. You begin to slow down your impulses. You question your habits. You examine your feelings instead of letting them control you. This shift from reaction to consciousness becomes one of the most powerful transformations of your life. Living consciously doesn't mean you never struggle. It means you no longer move blindly. You observe yourself with honesty. You notice when you're acting from insecurity, from fear, from past trauma, from resentment. Instead of letting those emotions dictate your behavior, you pause. In that pause, you reclaim your power. You choose responses that align with your values rather than your fears. You choose actions that support your future rather than protect your past. You begin to act with intention. As you live consciously, you become more present in your relationships, in your work, in your daily decisions. You speak with clarity rather than defensiveness. You listen without needing to attack or retreat. You set boundaries without guilt because you finally understand your own emotional landscape. Conscious living makes you more patient with yourself and more precise with your choices. You stop running on emotional autopilot. You stop reacting to every trigger. You stop letting circumstances dictate your internal state. You also begin to notice how different your life feels. The chaos that once consumed you loses its power because you no longer fuel it with unconscious reactions. You experience a deeper sense of stability, a groundedness that comes from being in control of your inner world. You stop trying to fix everything externally because you understand that alignment always begins within. Living consciously allows you to build a life that reflects your true values rather than your conditioned responses. With time, you realize that living consciously is not a destination. It is a practice, a daily commitment, a gentle return to yourself. And the more you practice it, the more naturally it becomes the way you move through the world, awake, aware, intentional, and deeply aligned. In the end, entering your golden age is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming present. It's about realizing that every version of you, every mistake, every hesitation, every quiet moment of courage has led you here to a place where your inner world finally feels like home. You are no longer driven by fear, noise, or the expectations that once shaped your choices. You are guided by something far steadier, the truth of who you are. This is the reward for all the unspoken battles you've fought within yourself. This is the return on every moment you chose growth over comfort, clarity over chaos, authenticity over approval. You have earned the right to move differently now, to speak with intention, to choose with confidence, to walk with a kind of calm that cannot be performed or pretended. It comes only from living in alignment. Your golden age is not a chapter you step into once. It is a chapter you continue to create with every boundary you honor, every truth you embrace, every piece of yourself you refuse to abandon. And as you stand in this new light, life begins to reveal doors you couldn't see before, not because they weren't there, but because you finally became the person who could walk through them. May you trust the timing of your unfolding. May you allow what is meant for you to meet you without force. And may you continue rising into the version of yourself who knows that the greatest transformations are quiet, the strongest shifts are internal, and the most powerful age you will ever enter is the one where you finally choose yourself.